Hi there, I'm Tracey Mason, co-founder and CEO of House of Saka. We make the world's first and only cannabis-infused beverages from Napa Valley, and you're listening to Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night?
Hello and welcome, listeners, to another episode of Professionally Cannabis. I'm Oscar Houseman, and with me is my co-host and friend, Johnny Weiser. Now, you'll notice as we go through this episode today that I'm notably silent. That was not because I didn't want to be there, I assure you, but I couldn't. And so, Johnny, in light of that, can you tell our listeners what auditory feast they're in for today?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a sad time to not have you on the feed, but I had a really great conversation with Tracey Mason, who is the co-founder and CEO of House of Saka. Now, they are a cannabis brand that create cannabis-infused wine. This is the second time actually on the Professionally Cannabis pod that we've had cannabis-infused alcoholic beverages or beverages that are mimicking alcoholic drinks. The first being Province Brands with their alcoholic beer. Really enjoyed the chat with Tracey, and what's really unique about their wine is that their formulations, the grapes and everything about the wine is actually from Napa Valley. Very famous area in the States for creating excellent wine. I would love to kick back and have a glass right now whilst listening to the pod, but sadly the regulatory regime where we live, Oscar, just doesn't permit it.
Yeah, I would always follow the regulatory regime where I live, but I'm still salivating at the thought of this one, so let's roll the clip.
Where do they go, the smoke
It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the pod Tracey Mason, the CEO of House of Saka, a California-based beverage company specializing in alcohol-free THC and CBD-loaded wine. With a career spanning nearly 30 years in the luxury wine space, we cannot wait to hear about Tracey's journey and the growth of a potentially huge global market in cannabinoid-infused beverages. Tracey, welcome to the Professionally Cannabis Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Tracey, the question we asked to all of our guests, of course, on the podcast is, what led you to the plant?
Well, I think there's two questions embedded with that. One is what led me to the plant, and one is what led me to the cannabis industry. And I think in one sense, they're very separate. In one sense, they come together quite nicely. You know, after, as you noted, I've been in the alcohol industry for quite some time, and so have spent a lot of time thinking about relaxation and need states. And by the same token, have recognized for many years that, alcohol certainly has many downsides relative to health and wellness. And, as I've gotten older and the concerns around health and wellness became more concerning to me, I started to look into alternative means of kind of creating that relaxation space. And also as an athlete, I'm someone who likes to move quite a bit. And again, as I'm getting older, I'm finding that I tend to stiffen up a little bit. So I started to do some research and discovered that CBD, particularly CBD that's enhanced with a little bit of THC, is just a beautiful body enriching substance. So I started looking into that, and I started learning more and more about the industry. And obviously, I'm someone who's, as an entrepreneur, is always looking for the next big thing. And it just sort of coincided with my own kind of diving in from an education point of view, kind of coincided with my founder, or my co-founder, Cynthia Salarizada, had started House of Saka looking to bring sort of the ancient ritualistic, it's hard to say, tradition of cannabis-infused wines into the modern age. So she has an amazing background in cannabis. I had an amazing background in wine. And so we came together and formed House of Saka really with that intention.
And since its inception, would love to hear a little bit about the journey that you've undertaken. You know, launching a brand of any sorts is a tall order, but in such a new burgeoning industry, love to hear sort of how the first few months and what built into the next couple of years sort of developed for you guys.
Well, it's funny because House of Saka is named after a group of ancient female warriors that were said to have ruled the world and conquered all they desired. So fittingly, I look at the industry and what we've done within it as, thank God we're warriors, because we've really come across and been faced with tremendous obstacles, and that our own strength and determination kind of had to push us through. When we formed House of Saka with the intention of creating a cannabis-infused wine-like product, we came across ridiculous regulations, but yet we put together a beautiful product that we frankly couldn't get bottled. So in other words, we were moving faster than the industry was moving in terms of how do you produce this? We couldn't get it bottled in a compliant way because there's such a distinct line between alcohol and cannabis that if you have a bottling line, you can't use that same bottling line, that same license to package cannabis-infused beverages. So, we sort of developed the product. We went through a tremendous amount of R&D, and we're very proud of what we had, but we had no way of getting in the bottle. So it took about 9 months for the industry to catch up to us and for manufacturing partners to come online that could actually bottle the type of product that we wanted to make, which is super luxury and super high quality. And so we were looking for a partner that can meet our quality standards and get the wine in a bottle. And so we were able to finally achieve that last fall. And that's when we launched Saka Pink, which is our alcohol-removed cannabis-infused rosé of Pinot Noir from Napa Valley that we then infused with THC and CBD no emulsion.
And very much on topic, would love to understand a little bit more about the specific origins of both the wine and the cannabinoids that go into the product. Of course, with wine, it's a beverage which is very much revered, and there are many critics over. Would be great to hear sort of about where you guys are sourcing your product from.
Well, I think the difference between House of Saka and I think some of the other players out there is that between myself and our COO, Sue Bukorski, who spent nearly 30 years at Constellation Brands in operations and finance, between she and myself, our connections within the wine industry are so, so deep that we're able to sort of have this amazing source of amazing wines within Napa Valley that aren't made public or aren't put on the market, and we're able to get access to them just through our connections. The wine industry is still an industry of relationships. And, I'm noting now as I start to grow within the cannabis industry, it is as well. So we felt as a brand that our Napa Valley provenance was critical to our sort of branding proposition. And there's a saying in the wine industry that place really does matter. And it's true, because when you're making an alcohol removed wine, you lose quite a lot when you remove the alcohol. I mean, not just from percentage wise, if you think that, any given wine is between, call it 12.5% and 15% alcohol. So you're losing that, and you're losing the weight on your palate and certain flavor and aroma compounds that also marry to that. So when you remove those things, you're left sort of with a very acidic grape juice, essentially. And unless you're starting with a beautiful wine that you can retain some of those classic aroma and flavor compounds, essentially you lose the ability to make a beautiful product. So for us, our wine sourcing is paramount to not only our brand proposition as a Napa Valley brand, but also to the quality of our product that I think is far and away better than anything on the market right now.
And with regards to the cannabinoids, the CBD and the THC that's going into the product, where's this derived from? We
use an emulsion of highly refined cannabis oil. We're using actually right now organic emulsions that we can't say that on our label because you're not allowed to have the word organic and cannabis in the same package, even though it is, which is strange. So we're using an organic emulsion, which essentially takes highly refined cannabis oil, and we're using a hybrid strain that breaks it into microscopic particles that become then highly bioavailable and self-homogenizing. So in other words, the cannabinoids are, instead of having to be processed through your liver like they would with a standard edible, they're processed, through your mucosa and through your stomach lining. So you feel the effects of the cannabinoids within 5 to 15 minutes like you would alcohol. So what's really beautiful about that is that it really gives people, especially people entering the space, some real education as to what amount of THC works for them, because it's so precisely dosed and you feel the effects so quickly. You'll know if 5 milligrams works for you, if 2 milligrams works for you, if 10 milligrams works for you. And we always, as I said earlier, there's, to me, and certainly it's been proven scientifically, that CBD with a touch of THC is even that much more effective. So we add CBD as well as THC to our emulsion and to our products so that you're getting that sort of mental high as well as that beautiful body high and relaxation that you would get from a CBD-based product.
And you've just segued us on nicely into the sort of topic that I was keen to touch upon here, and that is the user experience. Would be really keen to sort of understand what that's like. You know, are people drinking the drink in the same way they would a glass of Malbec, for instance? And, you know, if you're having a glass of House of Saka wine in the bar, you know, how far into the bottle would a consumer have to get before they attack the bowl of bar stacks at the counter? You know, are they going to be feeling high after a glass, or, you know, what's it like for the consumer?
You know, it really, and that's why it's such a great product, because it really depends on what your tolerance is. I mean, people that are, you know, legacy users of cannabis can consume up to 100 milligrams of THC a day. If I have more than 10, you know, I'm completely incoherent. So with something like Saka, you know, every glass, and it depends on which vintage, because we're upping our cannabinoid dose in our next vintage of Pink, which bottles this week. But, you know, typically a glass of Saka will have between 6 and 8 milligrams of THC and 1 to 2 milligrams of THC per glass. And so again, because you're not drinking it, you're not guzzling it, you know, you're having a sip at a time, and essentially you're probably having about a milligram at a time. It allows you to figure out what works for you. So the user experience, in my opinion, is, again, it's similar to alcohol without the negative effects of alcohol. There's 11 calories a glass, so it's a fraction of the calories of a glass of wine. But the occasion is similar and the need state is similar. And, you know, this idea of relaxing and unwinding and being social, that's what I think Saka brings to the cannabis space. And it also helps to draw people. People have asked me a lot of times, do you really expect people to give up wine and go to Saka? No, I don't expect that at all. I think I see Saka and our product as much more additive as opposed to taking away. There's always going to be a wine occasion, but our product is a perfect substitute when you don't want to have the negative effects of alcohol, whether that be, you know, on your body, on your look, on your next morning. And so if the user experience to me is, and as a user, it's uber relaxing. So it is just, if you want to get home from work and open up a bottle of wine and have that ritual and just relax, it's a great vehicle for that. It's also extremely social. So instead of, you know, passing a joint around, which, you know, most people aren't doing right now, especially in the, you know, advent of COVID, you know, the whole smoking, vaping thing. So this is a great vehicle to share with your friends and family and enjoy this, you know, enjoy an experience together in a way that's very socially acceptable, which is also, I think, a benefit of beverages in general.
And would you say that sort of consuming alcoholic wine versus consuming House of Saka wine, would you say those activities are mutually exclusive, or can you envisage a segment of users who in a given evening or day or whenever it is that they're consuming their various wines, can you envisage users that oscillate between the two in a session, or do you think that they're quite separate times and places to consume one or the other?
You know, observationally, you know, honestly, when I joined the cannabis industry, that it was sort of going to be that cannabis users use cannabis and alcohol users use alcohol. And what I've discovered very, very clearly is that, you know, people do use both, and they use both oftentimes in the same session. For me, I might have a glass of wine or two with dinner, but then I will finish the night with a glass of Saka, you know, because it does sort of take that edge off. Alcohol, if I have it too close to bed, will keep me up, or I fall asleep and then I wake up. So a glass of Saka kind of bridges that gap for me and creates that sort of relaxation without having those sort of sugar being processed through my body at 2:00 in the morning and waking me up.
And, you know, I mentioned in my opening that you've had a long career in luxury wines. And one of the other things I've noticed is across many of your roles, you've been spearheading the marketing. You know, you've previously worked at Diageo, which is a FMCG giant. So you must have real first-hand expertise in sort of how luxury wines are marketed. What are the key differences that you are finding between marketing traditional wines and marketing cannabis-infused wines? And as an extension of that, I do sort of typically like 2 and 3 part questions on the pod, so forgive me there. But as an extension of that question, what can and can't you say about the product that you may be able to for sort of traditional alcoholic wines?
Okay, well, let me kind of unpack that question a little bit because it's a pretty big one. So I think, the difference between marketing, luxury alcohol beverages and marketing Saka, I mean, they're similar in the sense that we've really modeled Saka in our branding and our approach to our target consumer in a very traditional way, and really have, we wanted to set a very inspirational bar for our product and for consumers entering into the space. So in that sense, we really drafted off of classic luxury brands like, Chanel and Hermes and brands that are sustained and sort of have this innate luxury that's associated not only with the actual product itself, but just with the name. So House of Saka, I think, really achieves that. And we really do hold a very high bar for anything that we put out into the sort of consumer-facing space in terms of how it looks, how it feels, and making sure that we're constantly saying, are we on brand? Whether that's what we're saying to you right now, or whether that's what we're saying to consumers through our advertising and promotion. But then on the other side of it, we're so restricted in how we can talk to consumers, where we can talk to consumers. I thought, after 30 years in the industry, in the alcohol industry, I really understood restrictive industries in the sense of how you can market something, and the alcohol industry was very, very good about self-policing. In other words, responsibility messaging, responsible consumption messaging being a key part of any marketing budget. And we've also drafted off that where we do, I would say at least 40% of our messaging specific to House of Saka is about responsible consumption. So we think that's important. But, our access to consumer is highly, highly limited. Where, here in the US, you can walk into any Safeway and look at, I think on average, Safeway has something like over 600 SKUs of wine. And here in California, there's, a total of 620 dispensaries, of which, really Saka only needs to be in a fraction of those to really talk to our consumer, and especially our delivery platforms, which are paramount to us. But we have to really focus our marketing dollars on working with our retail partners, because that's how we can optimize our spend. If we try to kind of do a shotgun approach with a brand that's targeted toward legal use cannabis, it's a waste of money because the access to the consumer is so limited. So we really focus the majority of our spend on obviously driving awareness and driving curiosity around the product itself and around the space. But moreover, working with our retail partners to go deep in promotion and advertising where their consumers, so we're drafting off of their consumer base. But it's further complicated because, again, as a company that's really targeting the emerging female consumer, which is the fastest growing consumer in cannabis, there's so much we can't say. So, for example, we can't use the word wine at all on our product, even though it is one or was one at some stage. We can't use the word wine. We can't use the word Pinot Noir. We can't do anything that it references at all that this could have maybe had alcohol in it. So we can't use, even to some extent, we can use it within our marketing, but we can't use the Napa Valley anymore on our label, even though we spend all this money sourcing our wines from Napa Valley, because the cannabis isn't grown in Napa Valley. And that's the really weird way that cannabis and appellations and wine appellations are intersecting, and in some instances colliding. So that's problematic. Our packaging has to be fully opaque, so you can't see what the wine looks like. And, oftentimes people do buy with their eyes. If they like that color of rosé, they're going to choose that one versus another. We have to have child-resistant packaging, which is extremely expensive and additive to our overall cost of goods, that is both resealable for the life of the product. So if you think about that, when that restriction, for example, came on board, where we had something that needed to be childproof and resealably childproof for the life of the product, that technology in a wine bottle kind of closure just didn't exist. So we were asked to meet a standard that didn't exist. So those are the types of things that we're constantly up against, is how do you talk about your product in such a way that you can get across what it really is, but, having to be so restricted on the types of language you can use. So that's been, that's really, I think, challenged our marketing our marketing prowess to a lot of extent, but between myself and Cynthia, we've got a tremendous amount of experience in the marketing space. So I think we've managed to create and kind of a aura around House of Saka and have really done a great job of establishing the branding and the positioning. And I think everything else would kind of fall from that.
And with all those restrictions in place, how do you make your product sing to your target audience? What creative ways have you been able to sort of reach that audience, bearing in mind all those restrictions that sort of you've just recently spoke about?
Well, I mean, I think, like any modern brand right now, social media is a critical element of our marketing mix. And again, in-store promotion where consumers can we can actually get face-to-face with consumers and talk to them about our product and what we're doing and what makes it special. I mean, I'm doing that tomorrow night at the newer dispensaries here in Napa Valley. And I'm really excited just to have the opportunity to talk with the bud tenders as well as their patients coming in and telling them about the benefits of Saka and why it makes sense, across a number of need states. So I think there's that. And then, again, I think it's most critical really within the space right now is word of mouth. And really, what does word of mouth come from, right? Someone experiences something, enjoys it, and then tells a friend, and so on and so on. And so that's why I keep coming back to our quality standards being what they are, and the experience that the consumer has needs to be amazing. So they will recommend it to their friends, that they will say this is game changing. And, we've gotten tremendous amount of feedback from our consumers and from influencers within the space that, finally here's something that I can bring to my mother's house on Thanksgiving and not have to step out. And because a lot of people that are using Saka don't use alcohol at all. A lot of, like, as we said earlier, some use both. So we've got to be very, very creative and work really closely with our retail partners. And I think overarchingly is making sure that we're always on point with our brand and with what's not only what's outside the bottle, but it's also what's inside of it.
Now, looking to the market itself, I believe the population of California alone is 39 million, if I've got that right. What do you think is the long-term potential size for this segment of the market in total, sort of outside of California as well? And, of course, another extension of that question is, how much more runway do you believe that sort of boutique brands like yourself have to steal a march on sort of traditional FMCG giants and incumbent wineries before they really enter this sector of the market, hammer and tongs?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. Well, I mean, it's absolutely far and away the fastest growing segment of the cannabis sector. I mean, a year ago, beverages were about 1% to 2% of the edible market, which is about 15% of overall cannabis use. Obviously, over the course of the last 6 months, I mean, beverages have just exploded and far exceeded expectations. There was always an expectation that beverages would somehow settle out between, 5 and, 8% of the overall edibles market. But what we're seeing now is beverages are usurping edibles. And for all those reasons that I talked about, where you're getting these automatic effects, you can know your dose. And so, beverages are far exceeding edibles in terms of their growth. And right now they're already at 14% of edibles and growing every day. I mean, I think a lot of us in the industry, I'm certain that you guys do follow, leaders in the industry like Canopy, and Canopy just announced a massive growth in their stock, really hinged on their ability to finally get beverages in the space and the way the consumer is responding to that and accepting this as a really wonderful alternative means to cannabis consumption. I think the good thing about being a boutique brand or even a startup in this environment is that no one's done it before. So it's not as though we're figuring out or we're drafting off of something that someone else has done before. So we're really pioneers in the space, especially, at the high end. We're certainly the only brand from Napa Valley. And as I've kind of wanted to really emphasize, we are our own product. We were super unique. We're not another flavored seltzer. We're not, a beer-like product. We're the luxury wine-like product from Napa Valley. So we have that benefit, but the big boys are already playing in the space, and those who aren't outwardly doing so, like Constellation, which is, and InBev, other companies like Diageo are certainly curious about the space. And having had a fair bit of experience myself at companies like Diageo and Treasury Wine Estates and Sue, our COO at Constellation, we certainly know the way in which those companies tend to innovate. And, back in the day, innovation was very organic and internal. And what we're seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing the same thing, is that innovation or, something that's additive to your portfolio, that's addressing a consumer segment or need state that nothing within your portfolio already addresses, is done primarily through acquisition. So, we're really looking to own a luxury infused wine product space here in California, expand to a few more markets over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, and then, really look at who's looking at us and go from there. Because we do think that, we have a really unique proposition and we have, some pretty talented people that have put it together. And, we want people to view us as the leaders in the space. And what comes from that could be, a million ways in which we would either exit or merge or continue to build the company, in its own state.
Now, one of the other things I wanted to touch upon, as we have done, of course, over 2020 across a number of our interviews, is the impact on COVID and how that has been for your organization. Now, I imagine sort of like all organizations, there's been somewhat of a hit on sort of supply chain and operations, but touching upon something you mentioned before is that in 2020, as a result of this pandemic, perhaps the way in which folks are sharing cannabis products are changing. Perhaps is an opportunity for brands like yours, which aren't reliant on people sharing joints or things of the sorts. Yeah, would be keen to hear about how COVID has impacted the business and sort of what you see as the developments from that.
I think, it's impacted business tremendously, especially our business. I mean, what it did for us, I think initially was really validate that our initial assumptions around sales channels, which our primary focus is delivery platforms, because we really felt like our target consumer, that's how they shop. That's their comfort space. They don't need to be stigmatized by walking into a dispensary. So we really validated that was the right focus for us as a brand, because it allowed, sort of this discrete means of trial. And we've certainly seen far and away from a repeat customer and from a, getting the brand out there, delivery platforms have been amazing for us. And as we touched on earlier, I think with the advent of COVID and the villainization of vaping and the sort of villainization, if you will, of smoking in general, it's given us an outlet to say, look, there is an alternative that's safe and predictable and consistent that these other formats don't actually offer at all, regardless. So, for example, if you have 3 ounces of House of Saka pink, for example, you're going to have 3 ounces of THC. 3 milligrams of THC. The 3 ounces would be a heck of a lot.
I was going to say.
So you'll know exactly what 3 milligrams feels like. If you take a hit off someone's joint or if you take a hit off someone's vaping, you really don't know how that's going to impact you, how high it's going to make you, how much you're actually consuming. And then, the same thing with edibles. You take something and 2 hours later, all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I'm way more high than I want to be. And in escaping that, you have no escape route, right? You have no escape hatch, where the benefit of the high onset effects of something like House of Saka is also that it has, very quick offset. So, it wears off, quickly, and more quickly than other means of consumption. So there's that as well. So I think that what we're seeing and what not only within our own business, which has really benefited from this space, and as consumers continue to sit at home and do more and more research around cannabis, it's been good to us. And I think it's been good to the sector, meaning the cannabis beverage sector in general, because we've really people are starting to discover that it's not only an alternative means of consumption, it's a better means of consumption. And that's really what we want to drive home from a messaging point of view.
Well, 2 things are absolutely clear from my side, and that is that I cannot wait to try the product and cannot wait to see how things develop for you and House of Saka over the next 12 months or so. But in the meantime, all that's left to say is, Tracey, thanks so much for joining us on the Professionally Cannabis Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Listeners, I hope that slaked your thirst for cannabis-infused beverage interviews. And if it did, As ever, we'd be thirsty for your likes, subscriptions, and comments. So if you can help a thirsty boy out, please do so. Share the pod with a friend, and until next time, ta-ra.
Hello, please take me above. Take me with you.